As we get started, I forgot to mention before, we actually found a hearing aid somewhere in here. So if you are missing one or you can't hear me right now, that's probably why. But it's come see me. I've got that. Otherwise, there are a couple of guys that were saying they were going to try it and see if it does any good for them. How many of you, for at least maybe a few weeks, couple months out of the year, live in Florida? Anyone? Or more? Anyone live in Florida at all? Okay. Man, it's going to be one of those days. So there are some of us, snowbirds, and I'll say us even though I'm not, live in Florida just a few months out of the year to escape that chance of that polar vortex that those northerners are suffering right now. Some of us born here and choose to stay here because it's Florida. Why would you want to leave? Except in June and July and August and September, a little bit of October. And there are others of us who choose at some point in our lives to move here because of something that Florida has to offer that all those other states can't give us. Since the majority of us spend a fair amount of time each year in Florida, we understand the sun. We understand that it's just a little bit different here in Florida. It seems to shine brighter and more intensely here, and you'd think that we would learn those lessons after maybe the first summer. Well, this is going to be my third summer here, and you'll see when our first beach day is that I haven't yet learned that the sun is a little bit brighter here. It's interesting because the sun will shine on you whether you give it permission to or not. The earth is going to go around the sun and the moon around the earth, and I checked the science facts on that, so we're okay. Because that's how God created them to be, and they're going to continue doing those things until God commands them to stop. We're jumping back into 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Last week we did chapter 8 because during the second service it's family day, and there are a lot of kids in that service that stuck around. And so I didn't want to cover just some of the things in here. As a parent, I didn't really want to go home and have those conversations on what some of these words mean. So today, this passage is about opportunities that we have specifically in our relationships. And Paul does a good job of kind of summing up the whole point of this in one verse in this chapter. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, in verse 17, he says, "Nevertheless, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them." And that sums up the whole thing. No matter what you've got going on, you should live as if you were a believer in whatever situation. That's great advice that Paul gives. Live like Jesus is Lord of your life. Live like you truly believe that this book is truth. Let's pray together and let's get into our chapter. God, thank you again for today. Thank you that we can come together here and we can read your word. Thank you that we can see the lessons that your church in the first century needed to learn, and that we can hopefully learn those lessons and do a better job and continue growing closer to you and do a good job of being your church here. Thank you so much for Jesus, and it's in his name I pray. Amen. All right, now, you might have noticed last week when I was reading from my Bible that it didn't match the words on the screen. That's because when I pasted it into my papers, which I copied from to put in the PowerPoint, I forgot to change it. And I did that again this week. So my Bible's here and opened, but I'm going to read off my paper so that it works for you guys a little better. So that's why I'm on the paper this week. So we're going to start with the first 11 verses of 1 Corinthians 7. "For the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man to not have sexual relations with a woman. But since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprave each other, except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish that all of you were as I am, but each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and a husband must not divorce his wife." The church at Corinth asked Paul some questions. Last week we covered the second set of questions. This week we're coming to this first set of questions, and they asked these questions of Paul because he was an authority figure to them as an apostle. They asked these questions because they knew that they needed some guidance. They knew that they weren't necessarily getting everything right. There was so much worldly, non-Christian influence seeping in. It all looked good, and they were struggling with what they were called to be and separating themselves from the world and living intentionally different, obviously different from the way the rest of their communities were living. All the things that Paul mentions and he clarifies here are issues that the church needed that clarification on, and they're issues that the church asked about. Paul says marriage is a gift. Paul also says singleness is a gift. Paul goes into some detail on sexual immorality. I've mentioned that their society had temple prostitution rampant in Corinth. Now, we don't have temples here in Central Florida that we see people running to for prostitutes on a regular basis. One struggle we have in our society that's just as common, if not more, that's just as accepted in some parts of our society is pornography. There are some people in the church in Corinth who were not staying physically faithful to their marriage vows. There were some people in Corinth that were not staying emotionally faithful to their marriage vows. This seems to be an area where Satan can really get his fingers in to the church and tear us apart. Can ruin a lot of people and hurt a lot of people and destroy our ability to simply function as followers of Christ because we're so broken from our own bad decisions. The fact that this was an issue in first century church doesn't mean that we can ignore it because that was so long ago we don't have that to deal with. It's okay for this to be an issue in our church today because, the church has always dealt with this, so we're just gonna deal with it because it's always been around. That's not how we handle the situation. These acts and these behaviors are forbidden by God because they are not good. I want to lay this out there. If you're in the middle of infidelity in your marriage, even if it's just a conversation and not yet physical, you need to stop. This is a problem the church had in the past, and if we don't learn from the problems of the past, how can we move on and pursue Christ? Get help. Talk to someone. If you're struggling with pornography and you think that it's only affecting you, I didn't look up statistics to see how many statistically of us in this room are struggling with pornography, but I know the statistics are bad. Get some help. Talk to someone. Stop. You're not just hurting you and your family, you're hurting the church, and you're betraying your calling as a follower of Christ to be set apart from the world so that you can better serve the world. Your actions affect each one of us. And some of us in here right now are thinking, this is the church. No one in this room is struggling with something like that. And if you're thinking that right now, I'll tell you that you're wrong. Married or single, your devotion is to Christ first and foremost. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love others as yourself. And you can't obey Christ and be caught up in sexual immorality. Paul goes on and he mentions authority in marriage. This is something we kind of talked about a little bit back, I believe, when we covered Galatians, and we kind of breezed by that because those are some of the topics we don't like to talk about as well. Who's in charge of who? Paul says in verse 4, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. Some of us like to stop there. But Paul goes on and says, in the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. And the flip side, some people like to forget the first half of that verse and remind each other of the second half of that. Paul mentions that in Ephesians chapter 5 as well. He told them basically submit to one another. And he says that in reference to the church as the bride of Christ. It's not one lording over the other. It's a mutual thing. Paul also takes a stance on marriage here that's contrary to the culture then, and dare I say now. Our culture is very different from what Paul's was, but in a lot of ways very similar. And his statement on equality and marriage being mutual is highly contrasting in their society and a lot of times in our society today. These and other similar statements in the Bible are taken out of context to give power to people. This is not what they are about. This is not what they originally were meant to do. This is not what they currently are meant to do and say. Marriage is not a power move where you gain a slave. Marriage is where you gain a partnership in which you share everything. Paul says that in his opinion, being single is better. Now, Paul was raised pro-marriage. Marriage in the Jewish culture was prized and commended and praised. When the young couple would come together in marriage, everyone, of course, celebrated. We celebrate marriage today, but in Paul's day, this was the expectation that you would go and you would be married. If you were going to be a rabbi, if you were going to go through the training and be this teacher that people looked up to and followed, you were likely, probably, married. If you were going to be on the Sanhedrin, the high Jewish council, the most respected of the most respected in their culture, you had to be married. Paul lived in a very pro-marriage society. It's highly possible that Paul was also married and then his wife died based on some of the ways he words things. So Paul knows being married and Paul knows not being married. Paul understood that this was his opinion and that it's not for everyone. Verse 9, he said, you cannot control yourself, then you should be married. But that's kind of a cop-out answer. That's like saying the devil made me do it, because you can control yourself. You've just made bad decisions. What he's actually saying is, if you're not able to control yourself, because you can, if you're choosing not to, please do yourself a favor and go get married. What Paul does here is he recognizes the benefits on both sides. He doesn't side with the extremes of self-denial that some did in that day, and he doesn't side with the extremes of self-indulgence as others did in that day. He sees benefits to both, and he says you have to choose for yourself how you can best serve, follow, and honor Christ. Now that we all know what sexual immorality is and that it's a bad thing, now that we all understand how authority in marriage and authority in the church works, what Paul addresses next here is sex. He goes in and he says that it's not a reward, it's not a bribe, it's not a punishment, it's not something you hold against one another. And marriage life is joined. Things are mutual, and husbands and wives have to be aware of each other and sensitive to one another's emotional and physical states, because it's not just about you, it's not just about her or him, it's about the two of you together. If you're married, you should find ways to help one another be a stronger believer. Find ways to encourage one another, push one another into service for the kingdom and for the church. You should be each other's number one cheerleader when it comes to doing God's work. It's interesting, this week I ran across, just completely coincidentally, I subscribe to a lot of blogs and I get the emails so I can walk around and read something on my phone while I'm texting my friend Gary. And this one article, a guy was talking to his friend and he said, hey, I've got to go, I've got to do the dishes tonight. And his friend said, it's great that you help your wife out around the house. And so the first guy said, hold on a second. I don't help my wife around the house. I live here. I use these dishes. That's part of living here. I have a responsibility in this home. It's not her job to do this. And he kind of blew that common idea out of the water a little bit. I also spoke with another friend, and he and his wife, they're about my age, and they're working hard to, divide up those responsibilities of the house so no one feels mistreated. Everyone gets a fair amount of chores to do, and she had the floors for a long time, and over the course of their discussion these past few weeks, he inherited cleaning the floors. And, he said the first few nights he thought, easy, I can do this, no problem. So he did the floors every night. They've got several kids and a couple of animals, and he cleaned the floors, sweep, mop, whatever he did, I don't know. Mopping doesn't sound like him, so probably not. But he swept the floors or vacuumed the hard floors like I do. And he then, after a few days, he got on Amazon and he ordered one of those little robot vacuums. That arrived, and he plugged it in, put his feet up, and his wife said, I can't believe you bought that. He laughed at her and said, I can't believe you didn't buy that. Marriage is a gift. And that's what Paul's hitting on here heavily, but keep in mind, Paul also says singleness is a gift. And you can take whatever situation you find yourself in, and you can serve God and you can serve the church. And the purpose of the church is solely for serving the lost and reaching them for Christ. Everything else is part of that. In Philippians chapter 2, Paul writes, do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. Some translations there at the end, instead of lights of the world, it says you shine like stars. And I like the shine like stars a little better because that seems brighter than just lights in the world. Matthew 5, Jesus says you are the light of the world. If you're married, that's your chance to shine. Each day is your opportunity to adore your spouse like Christ adores the church. Think of that. To adore your spouse like Christ adores the church. And if you're single, this is your chance to shine. Each day is your opportunity to pursue Christ like Christ pursues the church. Paul moves on now in the next few verses to talk about those relationships. And he focuses in on marriage here. And Paul, although he recommends not getting married again, he said that he recommends what he knows and what he chooses. But to those who choose marriage, let's read on verses 12 through 24 and see what Paul says to them. To the rest, I say this, I, not the Lord.
If any brother has a wife who is not a believer and she's willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who is not a believer and he's willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother or sister is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? Nevertheless, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned them, just as God has called them. This is the rule I lay down in all the churches. Was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. Was a man uncircumcised when he was called? He should not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. Keeping God's commands is what counts. Each person should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. Were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you. Although, if you can gain your freedom, do so. For one who was a slave when called to faith in the Lord is the Lord's freed person. Similarly, the one who is free when called is Christ's slave. You are bought at a price. Do not become slaves of human beings. Brothers and sisters, each person as responsible to God should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. Now, as you read this, I can kind of picture Paul, because we've said before, he spent a lot of time in Corinth. He knows these people. They know him. He loves these people, and they love him. There's a respect, and they both want the best for one another. Paul's not here to condemn them for their past. I'm not here to condemn anyone for their past. The past is done. You can't change what's already happened. I'm here, just as Paul's here for the church in Corinth, to encourage us for the future. Do better today than you did yesterday. I've said that before, and I'll say it again. I want to highlight a couple bits here in this passage we read. Verse 15 says, God has called us to live in peace. Again, remember, Paul's talking about marriage here. And if you're married or you've ever been married, you can think of those days when there's not a lot of peace around the house. Verse 17, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned them. Verse 19, keeping God's commands is what counts. One thing that I think we today can take from this section is, regardless of your situation in marriage, in your home, in your job, in everything and in every area, in all things and in every situation, you are called to live right. We know how to live right because we have the Bible, and if we are followers of Christ and we believe this is truth, then we have the answers to the questions we're asking, and keeping God's commands is what counts. It's too easy and too common to look around and think that someone else has it better. We look at someone else's marriage and think, oh, they've got it easy. We look at someone else's house, oh, their house is much nicer. We look at someone else's boat, oh, their boat's nicer than my boat. We look at someone else's job and think their job is easier and pays better. We look around and we become dissatisfied. We stop living in peace. We lose any joy that we may have, and that loss is no one's fault but our own. Now, Paul spends time here talking about a believer being married to an unbeliever. If that's you, hang in there. Keep loving Jesus. Keep serving the church. Your life may be that nudge that your spouse needs to see the world properly and come to know Jesus. For others, if you're a believer married to a believer, you should not be taking joy from that spouse. You should not be a negative influence. You shouldn't be the person that your spouse just can't stand being around because of your attitude. You should be the biggest support for your spouse and the biggest support for the church where you serve together. Paul is encouraging the Corinthian Christians, and he's encouraging us as well to do our best with what we have. Have you ever been in a really dark room? How many of you refuse to be in really dark rooms? Okay, darkness is kind of scary. It's kind of eerie. But then when you're in a dark room and you flick the lights on, what happens? It's blinding. These lights right here, we're used to these lights, but if we were in a dark room and these same lights came on, it would be blinding. On the same note, how many of you have ever planned a beach day? In July, you're planning to be out there on the beach, sun, the sand everywhere, and you pack your things, you pack some food, pack some water, pack some sunscreen, and then you pack some more sunscreen to put on top of that sunscreen. And right next to all that, you pack your flashlight. It doesn't make sense to pack a flashlight if you're going to be at the beach during the daytime, especially in Florida, because it's bright. It's easy to be a light in a light place. But it isn't easy to be a light in a dark place. And the world we're in is a dark place, and we are called to shine. We're talking about marriage today, and marriage can be tough. Life can be hard. The world we live in can be brutal. But remember those 3 verses I highlighted out of this section. God's called you to live in peace. Each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them. And keeping God's commands is what counts. Now, you probably know Belinda. She's our children's minister, and I stole her word, shine. This is Belinda's word. This is everywhere. Everything Belinda does has this word in it because this is Belinda's motto, Belinda's theme, and it's fantastic. I love how she encourages her kids to shine. I love how she encourages them to be good examples, to be kind always. I love how, seeing that, you can see that Belinda doesn't just tell her kids what to do and how to be, she shows her kids. She exemplifies that in all that she teaches her kids, all that she shows, every lesson, everything they do. Belinda is showing her children what it means to shine. And you see that reflected in her kids, that they also have that desire, that passion to shine. What about you? Are you living a life that exemplifies goodness? Are you just helping add to the darkness? Paul goes on to give his advice, his thoughts. And to be fair, I think Paul is qualified to give his advice and his thoughts on spiritual things. As we close out this chapter and wrap up the message, Paul's keying in on the fact that marriage is hard. Let's finish out this chapter, verses 25 through 40. Now about virgins, I have no command from the Lord, but I give a judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you pledged to a woman? Do not seek to be released. Are you free from such a commitment? Do not look for a wife, but if you do marry, you have not sinned. If a virgin marries, she has not sinned, but those who marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you this. What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they do not, those who mourn as if they did not, those who are happy as if they did not, those who buy something as if it were not theirs to keep, those who use the things of the world as if not engrossed in them, for this world in its present form is passing away. I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of the world, how he can please his wife, and his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit, but a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I'm saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way, in undivided devotion to the Lord. If anyone is worried that he might not act honorably toward the virgin he's engaged to, and if his passions are too strong and he feels he ought to marry, he should do as he wants. He's not sinning, they should get married. But the man who settled the matter in his own mind, who was under no compulsion, but has control over his own will, and one who has made up his mind not to marry the virgin, this man also does the right thing. So then, he who marries the virgin does right, but he who does not marry her does better. A woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she's free to marry anyone she wishes, but he must belong to the Lord. In my judgment, she is happier if she stays as she is, and I think that I too have the Spirit of God. Remember, Paul loves these people. He wants the best for these people, and he's telling them the end is near. That's the message Jesus came. In the end, every day we live, every day we're here, the end of time is coming, and Jesus is going to return, and those are things we need to be focused on. And if you're married, rightfully so, you should be focused on your spouse. He says in verse 32 and 34, if you're single, you can focus on God's work and God's work alone. You can be 100% devoted to kingdom work. If you're married, you can't be 100% devoted to Christ because you have to be devoted to your spouse. A lot of folks in the Corinthian church struggled because they weren't all married to believers. Remember, this is the first century church. Paul jumped in there, and they had a church in Corinth with maybe 50 people meeting in this house, and there were a lot more people than that in Corinth. Their spouses are pulling them away from the church and pulling them away from service to God, and Paul is giving them this advice on how to do the best they can in the situation they're in. So if you're married to a believer, there's your opportunity to shine. Be a blessing to one another and push one another on to serve God more fervently than ever before. Be devoted as a couple to doing God's work and see what you can accomplish together. If you're married to an unbeliever, this is your opportunity to shine. Be joyful, be devoted, be that person that people want to know, how are you so happy all the time? Be devoted to your spouse and be devoted to God. Pray for your spouse that he or she might come to know Christ through you. If you're not married, take advantage of this time. This is your opportunity to shine. Maybe you're waiting for the right person. Be prepared to love that person completely, but for now, be fully devoted to Christ. Maybe the right person has been taken from you already. You should love the time you had, but for now, be fully devoted to Christ. This is your chance to shine, to be a light to the world. Being married is a gift. Being single is a gift. We choose to live here in Florida, and we choose to be married or be single, and if we don't even choose the situation we're in now, we're called to do the best we can with where we are. We're called to be separate from the world. God has chosen his people to be an example and to be his voice. And how can we be his voice in the world? And how can we be a light in the world if we're not shining, if we're living just like them? We're going to sing another song, and it's a decision song, so we have to make a decision. Each Sunday we come to church, when we leave, we have to make a decision. My prayer is that you'll choose to shine in whatever situation, that you'll choose to reflect God's grace, God's holiness, God's glory in every situation you find yourself in, so that you might be an encouragement to the people around you. Maybe today your decision is that you're hearing this and you've got some struggles going on in your relationships, some struggles going on in life, and you need to sit down and you need to have some words with God to get that straight. Now's a good time to make that decision, to make that step, to open up to Christ and talk to him. Come down, let's talk, let's pray. Grab someone next to you, talk, pray. Maybe your decision today is that you need to take a big step and you've never committed to Christ as your Savior. You never accepted what he did as being for you, and you need to make that decision today to come up, to repent of whatever life you've lived, of whatever's going on, and follow Jesus in baptism and live a life that's a new life in him. Maybe you're doing those things. Maybe you've got a good prayer life. Maybe your life is doing pretty good and you want to be a part of a body, one body with many parts. Well, today's a good day to make that decision as well, and let us know you want to be committed to this church and what we're doing, that you need our help to be the best man or woman of God that you can be. And well, we need you to do that, so we know you're committed because we need you to be the best church that we can be in our community. We have to make a decision every day, and especially today as we leave here. And I pray that your decision is to stop whatever's going on in your life that shouldn't be there and to focus on serving God and shining for him. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for loving us. Thank you for bringing us together today. I pray you would help us as we try to live a life that honors you and glorifies you, God, especially in our relationships. God, these relationships, they take a lot of our time, a lot of our devotion, a lot of our energy. I pray that whatever situation we find ourselves in, God, that we could glorify you, we could do the best that we have, God, and we would know that it's obeying your commands is what counts. Be with us today, and it's in Jesus' name I pray.